Cool. Well, let's get started. We're a couple minutes in. Hey everyone, welcome and thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Richard from BugHerd. Please, before we get into things, please feel free to jump into the chat. Tell us where you're from, what your job title is. We'd love to get some engagement from the group. Today I've got Harv and Lindsey here. Harv's going to take us through the maturity gap, which was a report done by the team at Scoro. I've had a sneak peek and it's a really interesting bit of research. Why most agencies like stagnate operationally essentially, and why the top 20% are actually doing things differently and having a meaningful impact on their revenues. Um, Before we get into things, just a little bit of housekeeping. So this is mostly going to be a presentation format from Harv, but we will have an opportunity at the end for a Q&A. So please put your questions into the Q&A, not the chat, so we can see it there. But throughout the presentation, Harv might ask questions of the group. Put those answers in the chat because that's really great for us to see and we can sort of incorporate that into the conversation. A little bit about me, we'll do some introductions. Start with me. I'm head of product here at BugHerd. For those of you who are new to us, I can't imagine there's many on this one, but BugHerd makes it ridiculously easy to gather client feedback on website projects. So if you haven't heard of us, check us out, we'll change your life. But my background and why this is an interesting conversation for me is I come from a digital production background. I worked for Ogilvy in London, MRM, JWT, various of the larger holding company agencies for clients like Amex and Unilever and things like that. Yeah, a lot of these things that I can see in this report have definitely resonate. Especially having gone small agencies and bigger agencies, you can definitely see the difference in how these things matter. So that's me. Harv, did you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Richard. Pleasure to be here. So thanks very much for inviting me, first of all. So everyone, my name is Harv. My background is actually in agency delivery. I used to be a digital producer earlier in my career, eventually moving into digital director, managing delivery teams and kind of client engagements. From there, I was getting more and more involved behind the scenes at my agency. My agency was very scrappy and in some ways quite chaotic. And you'll see some of that. I am going to be speaking about some of those kind of stages of maturity in this presentation. I feel the pain when I'm telling the story because I've been there. But anyway, so I was digital director, and over that time, I started just fixing things that were broken in my business that no one else was taking responsibility for. We didn't have an operations person. And eventually I realized that's what I really loved doing and started making a case for operations and eventually became operations director. Now I'm head of brand comms at a platform called Scoro. I'm going to very briefly tell you about that in a few minutes. But I also host a podcast called The Handbook, the Operations Podcast, where I speak to really brilliant operations and agency and consultancy leaders on how to run a better business, learning from their mistakes and successes, and talking about just generally business maturity and how hoping the audience learns ideas from that and so on. But that's a bit about me. Lindsey, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Richard and Harv. Great to see you, Harv. I've been on Harv's podcast and it was great, and he's wonderful. So fun to see you again, and it's great to be here. So I'm Lindsey Head. I'm based out of San Diego, California. I'm the CEO and founder of Pulse Business Group. What we do, we are a tech first finance and operations consulting agency, business consulting agency that helps small to medium to big growth size businesses scale and grow. And so my background, starting kind of at the beginning, I helped start and launch a money management firm where we managed hedge funds. That was kind of the beginning of my career in setting up a shop, right? Setting up the operations behind the scenes. My degree was in operations management and information systems. So that was what I was trained in and ended up in finance and operations throughout my career and now running my own firm. But so I did, yeah, it was a starting a money management firm was the beginning of my career, and then I did hedge fund accounting, which was very specific and detailed. And I said, no, 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 I'm much more in the big picture. I need to be in like kind of the strategy of a business. I just had a passion for it and love startups and love growing companies. And so from there, I joined a tech startup that was growing and did mobile marketing, and they ended up being acquired by Yahoo, which was a really exciting thing to be part of. And then I joined, it was called J Public Relations, where I held the seat of a CFO and COO, building their company from, I'd say, 5 employees where I started with them up to over 100 and scaling to 10 plus offices and worldwide. So led and grew the team there, the operations team. And then I decided I really love doing this and I want to go out on my own to help all different types of companies, specifically professional services firms. And that's what I did. So 7 years ago, I launched Pulse Business Group and really just have a passion in connecting with founders and executive teams growing their companies.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, over to you, Harv. Take it away, mate. We're really interested to see what you got.
Thank you. And Lindsey, that finance and operations background, first of all, having that dual skill set, super amazing. And that's also one of the reasons we definitely wanted you on this webinar today. So you can also tell us what you've seen on the ground. And of course, Richard, yourself as well. You speak to a lot of consultancies and agencies. So really keen to get both of yours input on some of the findings that I'm going to be presenting today. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And you should be able to see this bluish slide. Yes?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so let's get started. So everyone, I'm going to tell you about some of the research we've done looking at agencies and consultancies. I know many of you work in delivery, and what we're going to be talking about today is actually the way your business works. Depending on your seniority level, you might feel like you don't have a lot of control over that in the way the business is run. But what I'd like to say is that, in fact, you do. I hope when you watch this, you'll be able to reflect on how some of these findings reflect what's happening in your workplace, at your agency or consultancy. And with that, you can share some of the tips and resources that I'm going to be presenting here today with your ops or finance or management teams and see what comes of it. In terms of the agenda, we've already covered introductions, but we're going to talk about what business maturity is. I'm going to talk about what I call the eras of maturity. We're going to be talking about the maturity quiz. And then we're going to talk about some of the headlines that we found from this report that we created. And I'm going to be, like I said, asking Lindsey and Richard to comment on that as well. And then we're going to talk about kind of what's next. And of course, like Richard said, please pop your questions in the Q&A. Would love to see some of those, and then we'll answer those towards the end. Okay, just a really quick word of context. In the audience today, we've got agencies and consultancies, which are professional services businesses. I mean, I know a lot of people in agencies don't often refer to themselves that way as a professional services business, but really all that means is that you're in the business of selling your time and expertise, right? Well, the company I work for, Scoro, is a professional services automation platform, which means it's designed for businesses like yours. I'm only going to take 30 seconds to tell you a bit about what it does. And for those of you that haven't heard of Scoro before, it brings together your quoting for your client projects. So you can build a budget, you can manage your pipeline, you can turn those quotes into projects and do your, time sheeting, time tracking, your expense tracking, your purchase tracking, your task management. And then you can invoice from the same platform. I think I missed resourcing there, but you can, of course, resource your projects as well. And then it plugs into things like your accounting platforms or your HR platforms, and even stuff like your LLM of choice, so ChatGPT or Claude. So you can get platforms like that to get answers about what's happening in your projects or even take actions in the system for you. Okay. And this was actually, it's funny, I've been with the company 2 years, but this was a platform I'd brought in at my past agency as operations director. And I loved it so much that I joined them 2 years ago. Sometimes people refer to platforms like this as CRMs or ERPs or practice management platforms, but really PSA is the correct term. But anyway, on to our topic for today, business maturity. What is it? Okay. Well, we're very used to looking at our lives, even civilization, in terms of stages or eras. But our places of work, not really. We don't tend to use that same kind of lens. And I think we should, because the same principles apply. Just like we should be getting more mature as we get older and civilization changes over time, our organizations should be maturing as well over time, right? And that's where the idea of a maturity model comes in. So here's an example. Maturity models tend to have 5 stages. When you Google maturity model, you'll find loads of them for different kind of industries and niches and so on. But they all tend to have 5 stages. And depending on which model you're looking at, the labels of the stages may differ, but the ideas are fairly consistent. The other thing I found when I look at maturity models online is some of the labels of terminology are very kind of clunky and hard to understand. So I've invented some of my own, which I'm going to talk you through. And what I'd love for you to do as I talk about these is just think about where you think you are, your business is, as I run through these. Okay, I'm not going to take too much time on this, but just really quickly to run you through those stages. On the far left, the lowest stage of maturity is what I call the chaotic era. Okay, there's nothing consistent happening. Everything is made up as you go. Success tends to depend on like individuals just doing a good job and hoping for the best. And every project can kind of feel like you're starting from scratch. Okay. So again, think about what I'm saying and maybe have a think about where you think you're at, and you can share that in the chat if you like. So that's the chaotic era. Level 2 is what I call the glimmers of growth era. This is where you have pockets of best practice in the company, but it's super inconsistent. And usually those pockets of best practice come from really keen people that are frustrated with the chaos and maybe quite organized and structured. Just kind of saying, you know what, this is a mess, and I'm going to sort this out and fix it, or at least my team is going to work in a better way. That's an example of what I meant at my agency when I was starting to get more involved in the behind the scenes. It was super chaotic, and I was just like, my team, the digital team, is going to run this way because it's just the rest of the business is a bit of a mess. From there, you move into stage 3, what I call the stable era. This is where things start looking really good. You've got defined roles, you've documented your processes, and maybe you've brought in really good systems. There's a central playbook and everybody knows what they're doing, okay? But you're mostly looking backwards in terms of your data, right? You're looking at how you did on your project towards the end rather than looking at what's going to be happening going forward. And the same goes for your ops and finance teams. They're not really focused on financing. They're really analyzing where were people spending their time last week, last month, last quarter, rather than what's coming up ahead. So your business tends to be generating good data because you've got good processes and your time sheeting and logging expenses and all that stuff really well. But again, not really looking forward. So hopefully some of this is sounding familiar to some of you, and you're recognizing your workplaces or places you've worked at in the past. From there, we move into the data-driven era, and this is a fantastic place to get to. This is where you're making decisions based on live data. You know, you can catch problems mid-project. You can forecast what's coming up in the business. You know, how much business are we about to bring in, and do we have enough people to cover that? And you're able to not be so reactive. You can plan for this. You can make sure that your team is not going to be kind of sitting on the bench with nothing to do. And at the same time, you can plan ahead and see that people are going to be super busy, and we either need to hire or we need to bring in a freelancer, that kind of stuff. Okay. And then we get to the innovation era, and a very few number of companies get to this stage. I think it's something like only 5% of all agencies and consultancies and professional services businesses get to this innovation stage. And at this point, you're kind of firing on all cylinders, and you can really focus on kind of developing and innovating your offer and the customer experience. And like continuous improvement is just built into what you do. And hopefully you're leaving the competition well behind, because again, very few businesses get to this stage. Okay. So hopefully you saw yourselves in one of those stages. So from that maturity model, you know, I just step back for a moment. Last summer, I launched what I call the business maturity quiz. So why did I do this? When I was first moving into operations, I was reporting to our COO, And at that creative agency, he was my boss, and basically he introduced me to the idea of a maturity model. And he said, go and look this up and try to figure out where we sat, like where the business was at. And it was a super eye-opening thing for me. And I don't mean that I went and spent like hours studying this or did some kind of course. It was just like really looking at the model at a high level and kind of reflecting on those stages gave me a lot of insight into kind of where we were at in terms of our maturity. I had done a lot of stuff over the years to improve the business, whether business operations, whether I was in as a digital producer or as a digital director or as operations director, but it was my first time in an ops role. And so I didn't know what great looks like. And looking at that maturity model really helped me. So that's why I wanted to create this quiz in this role that I'm in to help other businesses, agencies, and consultancies also understand where their maturity is. Because if that was so valuable for me, I think a lot of other people would get value out of it as well. It literally takes 3 minutes. It's 25 multiple choice questions, and it gives you a steer on how you rank across these 5 operational pillars: people, processes, technology, data, and growth strategies. Okay, so it gives you a bit of an indication of where you're at in those pillars and also some advice on what you can do to get to the next level. And you get your overall maturity score, I should say, as well. Now, before we get into the headlines of the report, I just wanted to tell you why this matters also financially, right? SPI Research is a market research firm, and they've been studying professional services businesses, which includes agencies and consultancies, for decades. And they've got something like 50,000 businesses in their data set. And they say the profitability difference between the most and least mature businesses is 7.7 times. So that's not small, that is massive. So just by leveling up your maturity, you can be so much more financially successful as a business. Okay. So we're going to look at a few of the headlines. In the first 5 months of the launching the business maturity quiz, it was over 300 businesses completed it, businesses like yours. And I've pulled out a few of the headlines that I thought you might be interested in. So some of them you might nod along to and say, yeah, that sounds familiar. And some of them might surprise you because they also surprised me. Some of them disappointed me. But let's see what you think. And I do have to say, these are kind of like 5, 6, 7 headlines that I'm sharing with you. The full report goes into so much more. So you'll want to read that after this presentation today. We'll share a link with that with you later in this presentation, but also in the follow-up email. And Richard, Lindsey, I'm going to be throwing to you guys as well. So please feel free to comment and tell us what you've experienced or what you've seen in places you've worked or places that you've kind of consulted with and so on. And for those of you that are watching, what I'd really love is that while I present these, each of these headlines, if you could share with us if your workplace has those kinds of issues as well or not. That might be really interesting for the rest of us to see. So if you're ready, we'll kick off. And so yeah, let's kick off. The first one is that roles are clearly defined at just 35% of agencies and consultancies that completed our quiz. Okay. 59% of these businesses described them as somewhat defined, and 6% said they were not defined at all. Okay, so this might sound like a small problem. You might think, well, it's just a bit messy in terms of job descriptions being written down, or maybe there's a bit of lack of clarity about who owns what, and people might not be really clear about who's responsible for doing X and Y, or 2 people might think it's their responsibility, things like that, right? But is it a small problem? What kind of the data shows is that role clarity is a huge signal of maturity in itself. 95% of chaotic era firms have a bottleneck with their decision making. So they've kind of got one leader or the managing director or the CEO or whatever making all the decisions. So not only do they it slows down decision making and also takes away their focus from working on things that they should be doing because there's nobody else designated to take on those responsibilities and also take part in that decision making. By the time you move to the data-driven stage, it's 37% have still have a bottleneck with their decision making. I think I've messed up that line, but that's okay. So the firms who have figured out who's responsible for what are just by nature much more mature, and the ones that are kind of fuzzy on that role definition are the ones that are kind of stuck at the bottom. So that's where I'm just going to pause for a moment and ask Lindsey, like, is this something that surprises you? And is this something that you see with the businesses you consult with, that there's so few that have clearly defined roles and responsibilities?
I do. This is actually not surprising. I feel like when you're building in a building company right at the beginning, it's like everyone do everything. But to reach that next step, it really is defining the roles that's necessary. And I've seen that, right? As you start going, it's like you're just kind of go, 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 go to push the business forward and service the revenue that's coming in. But truly, you do see a difference when you start to define the roles. I've seen it a million times, or now I'm helping clients actually design their, like, not their dream team, but the right people in the right seats and what is their function so that things can clearly get done. And then the processes come with it, right? So when you've got the people, and the process. Like a lot of everything you're saying here is spot on, but
Yeah.
I'm not surprised. I mean, unfortunately, I think people don't take the time to do that, and that's where they get stuck.
Yeah. I think a really good example of this, Lindsey, is also when you have sometimes at a less mature business, people have been there for a few years and they want a pay raise, and they want to move up, and you want to keep them. So they get promoted, and you might end up creating like senior account manager or account director and senior account director. And the problem is you start creating these roles, but you haven't defined the difference super clearly. So you end up having an account director doing the same thing maybe as an account manager, right? And it becomes really blurry. So, what's the difference and what are they responsible for versus what you're responsible for? So it becomes really important, I think, in that regard.
You touched on something very common that I've seen, right? Grow with the title, but you don't change the duties necessarily.
Yeah,
And so you get some blurred areas, especially if there's multiple people on the team, right? Where the
absolutely.
team is still saying, well, so and so got promoted, what's happening that's different? And
Yeah.
it does create a little bit of friction, I've seen, but also there's a great opportunity right then to say only give promotions when you've clearly defined the roles. That's a good starter, right? But then also say this is what comes with it
Hmm.
and make sure everybody knows that. I think role clarity across the board at all the levels is what's really makes the difference, because then it moves the needle and it moves the company forward.
Exactly. We'll move on to the next one, but just to your point there, I think this helps so much with like kind of performance reviews and stuff like that, because without that clarity, it becomes really hard for the management team to, or your line managers to kind of just assess where people are at. It makes everyone's job more difficult is the point, really, if you don't have that kind of structure. So a really important milestone. Let's move into the next one. Okay, this is where I say kind of running on rumors. Only 21% of agencies and consultancies have documented their best practices. Best practices. I mean, I personally find that shocking. Maybe again, it's not, but that means nearly 80% of all businesses, agencies, and consultancies are running on knowledge that's kind of stuck in people's heads, things that are passed on in conversation or like lost in Slack threads, or picked up by sitting next to someone, right? And when that person leaves, you lose that knowledge because it hasn't been documented. And that person could have years of kind of best practice in their head, and then your business needs to kind of start from scratch once they leave. One of the first things I did in my first ops role was create a central handbook for the agency. We documented our systems, our processes, all our company information, policies, all that kind of stuff in one place. And to be honest, when I was creating that resource, because we had been so kind of scrappy and chaotic, I didn't have confidence that anyone was going to look at it. So I was kind of working on it because, our COO was saying that we needed this resource, but I felt quite deflated thinking I'm the only one that's ever going to read this. But it ended up being so not true. When people, I think people obviously feel much more supported when they know there's a central resource. It gives them also the confidence that the business has things under control. It looks really good when a new starter comes in and you refer them to the handbook and it's got all that knowledge centralized. And especially when you're rolling out a new process or a new system, it gives them somewhere to go look for answers rather than having the anxiety of like, oh my God, everything's changing and I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing. And documentation plays a huge role in moving to level 3 of the maturity model, which is what I call the stable era, right? You've got repeatable processes and you've got consistency in the way you work. So it's a really, really great place to be and super, super important. And so Lindsey and Richard, like again, I was super surprised that only 21% have documented their best practices. Surprising to you? And for those of you watching, surprising to you, or does this kind of reflect reality?
I'd just say not surprising at all, and I don't think it's unique to agencies. I think it's a thing through all types of businesses and all sizes of businesses. Yeah, Lindsey.
I would agree. Same. I mean, similar to you, Harv, I feel like having a centralized, well, handbook, right, and a centralized hub is necessary. And there's many companies I've seen that have been in business a long, long time, and they still haven't done it. And
Yeah.
that's usually the first place I go, right? Is like at least have it. It's not to teach them, but it's to have the resource for them. And I find it's really, really useful because when you start talking to people about how do you do X, how do you do your job, that's when you start to realize like if people have different answers, then there's a problem. But yeah, I'm not surprised at all.
I
Okay.
think also like just the process of writing is thinking about it. You know what I mean? So in you going and doing that, you force yourself to sit down and think about it,
Mhm.
which
Mhm.
in itself starts to change things. So, but yeah, it's always the trickiest bit is getting buy-in from everybody else, right? So, yeah.
I think what I found when I was kind of in the ops role, there's a lot of questions people have when you are the kind of operations person or just any kind of leader, digital director, delivery lead, whatever it might be. There's a lot of questions people might have about how to do something, especially when they're new, but not only when they're new, right? And what I loved about creating that central handbook was that I could then just say, go look at that page in the handbook it was a website. So go look at that resource and you'll find the answer. And it saves me having to type out that answer every single time so I can get on with my responsibilities. But then everyone starts really understanding the way the business works because there's a single source of truth. It's not rumors that are passed around.
Mhm.
All right, so let's move into our third headline. Only 1 in 8 firms have automated any meaningful part of how they work. So, only 1 in 8 firms have automated meaningful parts of their work. Just 13% say they've automated, sorry, more than a third say they've automated almost nothing. So 1 in 8 have automated meaningful parts, and more than a third say they've automated almost nothing in 2026. So it's not that automation is new or complicated. It's just that people haven't made this a priority, or they think it's complicated. They're still manually doing things that could have been automated years ago, right? Um, and I think the interesting thing is that a lot of us are very focused on AI at the moment, but there's AI and automation are two separate things, and they're both really important, and they both have their advantages. So if you're trying to bypass and do everything through AI, that still requires a prompt, every time. Whereas you could be clicking a button that executes a number of tasks and allows that work to flow. So it's just a really important thing to do. But anyway, over to you, Lindsey. I'm not super confident that firms are going to be, agencies and consultants are going to be nailing the AI problem if they haven't even addressed automation properly. Any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I agree with this a lot. And my rule, and I've talked about this a lot, is the rule of five. You touch something, well, I like to say three or five, but you touch something five times, you should be automating this. Like you shouldn't be doing the repeatable things all the time. It just doesn't allow for scale. So there are many, many ways to automate these days, and it's not AI driven. I mean, I know back in the day I was automating just a process using Zapier and Google email, scripts or things like that, just to take away the manual aspect of taking data from one place to another. So, and that was what, years ago, right? Because those little connectors existed. And so thinking about ways that different systems can connect was the old days. Now you can do it so fast that you still have to get to the root of the problem, though. Where are the bottlenecks? Where are people touching the same information? And if they're not doing that, then they are going to have a challenging time. So I love to see that. Like, it's like, tell me about your process, tell me how you're doing it, show me how you're doing it. And then you get to the root of like what's happening. But I'm not surprised with this headline because many people I think don't necessarily think like that, right? You're not an operations person maybe, and then maybe you don't think you have the tech skills. Now AI is
Yeah,
there, but is it integrated and are you using it or is it too overwhelming, right? There's people are at different places with their savviness, I guess, of different systems. So I'm not surprised, but I do think it'll be a challenge if they haven't even touched on what does it mean to automate, even the
yeah.
basics.
Yeah, absolutely. Every time you're starting a new project, you're starting from scratch and you're hunting around for files and setting up your project structures and stuff like that. Whereas you could have things like, okay, well, that quote is now signed off, so let's turn it into a project. That's an example of automation, right? And your invoices are attached to the project, or based on the project rather. So you're not having to recreate them somewhere else. That's another example. But Lindsey, like you said earlier, and I said earlier, you've been on the podcast, and that was something you said on the podcast, and it's one of my favorite like things that I've heard somebody say is that if you have to touch information five times, that is a perfect example of something that you should sort out and figure out a way to automate.
Yeah. On that, I think like the automation side thing versus AI, like you lump them in together a bit, but they're
Yeah.
sort of two separate things.
Hmm.
Um, I think from an AI point of view, that's something we're very focused on at BugHerd because I think there's a lot of anxiety in the agency community about AI right now. And I it sort of stems from this idea that, will we have jobs? You know what I mean? Are we relevant in the future? I think the thing that leads into why a lot of folks maybe don't set up automation is because a lot of us at agencies start out as like, we're all rounders. It's one of the things that attracted me to being in an agency, right? Or small
Yeah.
businesses, you do all the things and you can do all the things. And, often it's just easier. Oh, yeah, I touch that every week 5 times, but it'll take me 2 seconds to just do it again versus
Hmm.
like, go and think about setting up the thing when I got these five other projects going on and like everyone's needing my attention and blah, blah, blah. It's like carving out that time to do it. And I think AI actually just compounds that because I know for me as now a product manager, I've got so many little pots on the boil because I can do 5 times as many things in like the amount of time. And as you know, a person who likes to do the things, you sort of gravitate towards the busy work, if anything, which you
Oh,
should be automating. But yeah, it's a
yeah.
it's a complex one, but it doesn't surprise me at all.
I think that's a really good point, Richard. I find that as well. And I mean, I used to struggle with that as ops director, and I still struggle with that in my current role, is sometimes the small kind of niggly things are the ones that you end up focusing on because it just feels good to tick things off your list.
Yeah,
But then you end up not working on any of the important stuff, right? Because you
yeah,
spend those small things can fill up your entire week. And you
yeah,
end up like I would find that the important stuff gets shoveled into smaller and smaller windows on a Friday, and then it's like, oh my God, I didn't get anything done that I wanted to, and I spent all week kind of firefighting or doing these like silly things. They still need to be done, but a perfect example of where you should be focusing. Shall we move into the next headline then? And this is interesting. Zero or not surprising, 0% of the lowest performing agencies and consultancies track time accurately. Okay. So on the data side of things are a mess because you've set up project budgets at the start of the project. You've prepared a quote based on how long you think things are going to take. But then you end up not tracking anything. That's a problem because you don't know if you've overserviced that client, and that's time that you should be spending on other paying work. You just don't know where your team's time is going. You don't know if more senior people have worked on this than was planned, or whatever is happening. And you also don't really know if people are just kind of sitting idle and they don't have enough work to do, and so on. It's also a challenge because if people, and it's a common complaint, we need more resource, we need more people. But if you're not really tracking time, you have no idea if that's true. You don't, you just don't know if you can actually be hiring another person in your team because you have no idea where that time's going. So this is, yeah, not surprising to me, but it's kind of a no-brainer that this is something that I think people should be doing. Richard, Lindsay, thoughts?
I mean, time tracking is the reason I now work in a product business, not in an agency. I hated chasing everyone for timesheets, and
Yeah,
it was the worst. But there's a lot better solutions out there now than back
yeah.
then. But yeah, I hate timesheets. I don't think anyone in professional services enjoys
Mhm.
timesheets.
Yeah,
I,
you're right. But I think one of the things, and Lizzie, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is that it's just so important to explain to people why this is important, right? No one likes doing timesheets. So the point is that you need to explain, as a management or leadership team, why. We need to make sure that we're not working more on client projects than we had planned, than they're paying us for, and things like that, right? And if we need to make sure we're profitable on those projects and we're not just kind of burning through money. And the more profit, then the better offices, better equipment, and potentially bonuses and that kind of stuff comes into play, and better perks. So it's really, really important that's explained properly.
Yeah. To your point, I love that because the why behind it is so important because nobody loves it. I second that. Nobody does. It's like the worst like thing, right? So if we can figure out always better ways to do it and more accurate, then we can have better data to make decisions. So I know it's a challenge. I know for agencies it's a big, big challenge, right? To say, do we have all the timesheets in? I mean, that's a pain for a lot of people, a lot of agencies. So getting that information though is so crucial to the growth of the agency and to make decisions. I've helped a
Absolutely.
number of really early stage agencies where they didn't have any of that in place. And
Mhm.
even getting that in place was a struggle, right? Even nailing down the tasks and having that in place. It's like, this is going to tell, but I always come from the standpoint of why. When you have this information, you'll be able to know when you can hire, when it
Yeah.
makes sense to hire. We're going to be able to set the metrics so you can be profitable. You can hit the metrics, the milestones, all the things. So it all is driven by that data, especially in a service firm.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. You nailed it. And I think I was going to make a point that there's a lot of more interesting ways to track time now, right? An example, like, sorry for the quick plug, but like in Scoro, you have the traditional ways where you can start a timer or fill out like a timesheet grid. But there's also like more modern ways of doing that. Like you could block out your calendar in Scoro and just tag it to a project. So that's really good for project managers or account managers that have meetings, and they're not working on a single project all day. So when they have their calls or whatever blocked out in their calendar, just saying it's for that project and that task, and that fills out timesheet in a really, really simple way. If you're somebody that is that structured, you could just over the course of the day just be blocking out your calendar to say, okay, I spent 15 minutes on that, half an hour on that. And effectively, that's just linked to timesheets. Another really great way is if you get to that really kind of data-driven stage of maturity, and you're planning your resources, capacity planning, and booking your project resources ahead of time. Again, in platform like Scoro, that's what we did in my past agency, is those plans basically become automatically a timesheet. So nobody actually has to do anything. Really what we expected the designers or developers to do at the end of the day was look at their task list and say, well, that was planned for 2 hours, but it took me 2 hours and 15 minutes. So they made a quick adjustment or just click the tick button to say, I did that, and did that. And just ticking that task would complete a timesheet. So lots of really, really interesting ways. There's also like AI plugins that you can find online now that kind of just track what you're looking at all day. They don't kind of bulk send that to your employer or anything, but it just kind of summarizes all of that. And then you can just see nice blocks. So at the end of the day, you can go into your timesheet, whatever software you're using, and just say, okay, it was 2 hours on that, an hour on that, half an hour there, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway,
I've
timesheet.
just a couple of ones from the chat that are interesting.
Yeah.
Carleen raised a really good point. I think it ties into growing your maturity as a business is the non-billable time, having job numbers for non-billable time so that you can actually commit that time to doing the things that we're talking about here, right? Because none of
Yeah.
this work is really billable.
Yeah.
And if you're really going to be investing in your business, you got to invest that time. Oh, the lights are gone again. I'll be
Yeah.
back.
No,
Keep going.
yeah. Yeah.
I
No,
that's a good. Oh, sorry, her. Yeah.
no, I was going to say that that's a really good point. And I think it's also really important not just have one non-billable admin task, right? You want to have some tasks like saying like there's company meetings or client lunch or marketing and stuff like that, because it's still really important to understand if it's non-billable, what are people working on? You can't just have one
Mm.
task that says non-billable or admin and just say that's fine, because that becomes a dumping ground and then you have no visibility once again. You go back to square one because it's like that person just spent 4 hours on admin. What does that mean? So defining what those tasks are that people can track against. Um, shall we move into the next one? I'm just keeping an eye on time. So we've got a few more headlines to go through. So when looking at the full picture, 41% of firms track their time and expenses accurately. Okay. But only 13% use that data to make decisions. So the lowest firms we just looked at aren't bothering to track at all. And here, sadly, we have people that are going through all the trouble to track their time and expenses on their projects, and then not doing anything with it. It just kind of sits there. It's not connected to anything. It's not changing how projects are run or resources are allocated, which probably explains why a lot of people have frustration with timesheets as well. There's no evidence that information is being used for anything. So another really good reason why it's important, well, not only to be tracking time, but showing your team that this is used to inform us that, oh, that project is well over budget, or this client is always over budget, or this kind of project is always over budget, so that either to charge more for that client next time because they're always going to be a pain and ask for 100 amends, or just understanding that a certain kind of web project or whatever it might be takes way more time. So we're never quoting enough and we need to increase our budgets for that kind of thing. But Lindsey, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I've always gone into establishing the model for staffing and utilization, right? And it's talking about all of these things, talks about non-billable time and obviously how we allocate people's time. So every month or every so often, it's the resource planning and setting up how many hours at each level, right? Because your top level obviously is not as billable, but then you recap it. You've got to review, you've got to say, are you on track as an agency or as a business in total with your metrics, right? And then drilling down into those core projects that everybody's working on. And
Yeah.
it's the whole thing. Like you got to do a recap of everything. Are we hitting our goals as a company? Are we hitting our goals on a staffing and utilization standpoint? Or do we need to reallocate teams? Do we need, lower level team members working on this type of project? Because they can still get it done, but maybe at
Yeah.
a cheaper rate, right? Or a less cost effective rate. I hate saying that because everyone's very valuable, of course, when they're doing the job, but at a cost effective rate for that client. So looking at those client profit margins is key and doing it on a regular basis. Whether you're doing a
Mm,
quarterly recap to teach the team that, hey, we're watching, so they don't just think we're always hounding them. That's big.
absolutely. The next one's kind of related, so I'm just going to click into it. But I just want to emphasize that 13% number because I find that really painful to hear that, only 13% of firms are using live data to adjust the course of the project. The rest are waiting for the project to finish to figure out what happened, to tally things up. They send the final invoice, and then there's nothing they can do but take the hit if it's well over serviced, which may well be the case. And this one has a massive impact on profitability, right? And usually those signals are very visible mid-project. If you are tracking, you can see that things are taking way longer than they should be, and you can see the budget drifting. You can see the hours burning faster than they're expected. You can see the scope creep because clients keep asking for more and more. But if you're only looking at the numbers at the end, you've lost your opportunity to do something about it, to talk to the client and say, look, we need to like wrap this up. This is the final round of amends, or we're going to need additional budget if we need to keep changing the scope, things like that. But yeah, I think we've made the point on this one. So I'm going to click into the final headline now. What I call death by spreadsheet. Okay. So only 1 in 5 firms, agencies, and consultancies run their ops in a single joined up system. Okay. So that means 80% are kind of managing projects in one place. They're planning their budgets in another place. They're tracking their time in another tool. They're sending invoices somewhere else, tracking their pipeline somewhere else, and calling that a system. But that goes back to the example of automation that we gave a few minutes ago. That is an example, well, whatever the inverse of automation is. That's what I basically just described when everything is disconnected, right? The thing is, like, nobody decides to create a disconnected tech stack like that. It just kind of happens gradually. I think in those earlier stages of maturity, you kind of grab off the shelf tools. A project manager likes Asana, somebody else likes, you know, whatever, Apple to-do notes, and finance picks one system, account managers use something else, and everyone is just using something completely different, right? So that's an example of fragmentation on the very chaotic end. But even past that, when you start bringing in better tools, if they're not properly connected, that's a problem, right? Because you're manually copying and pasting information, downloading spreadsheets, and trying to downloading exports and trying to upload them somewhere else, and trying to reconcile stuff in spreadsheets. So the real issue isn't the cost of the tools themselves, it's the amount of time you waste getting this information from one place to another, the errors that come in, and that the data becomes really stale when you're looking at it, right? If you're exporting your timesheets once a week to look at them, by then so much could have moved past that, and you know, you might not know what's happening. So that's why it's really important, I think. And of course, I work for Scoro, which is one of those all-in-one platforms. So I would see the value, but I've also been a customer and seen the kind of maturity gains we had as a result of kind of consolidating this into an automated platform that has all of that baked in. And again, I was saying this earlier when we were looking at the maturity model curve. I think that kind of consolidation of data, bringing in a really good system, is a huge part of that maturity curve, and it kind of gets you to stage 3, if not enabling stage 4 as well, where you're really data driven. I don't know, Richard or Lindsey, if you have anything else to add, or we can shortly move into the Q&A as well. So I'll put
I
it to
mean,
you.
the world runs on spreadsheets. It still surprises me every day because BugHerd still, our major competitor is spreadsheets and emails, and it blows my mind. We've been around since 2010, and it's still the
Right.
case because they're just so flexible. But something we're seeing that's interesting in a shift is, especially in the last 12 months or so, the use of our API and use of MCP tools
Yes.
to integrate with AI.
Yeah.
People are rolling their own. So people are going, hey, you know, we'd love it if the dashboard could do this. Here's one we built with your API. And it's becoming so more democratized to do that. I think we're going to see a real spread of like people coming up with their own, you know, solutions. Obviously, the difficult thing with like, and why you get this separation of tools is because as new people come into the agency, like I've previously worked here and we use this, and especially when leadership people come in, it's like, oh, this is how our process should be. And that's sort of the point where things get reviewed. And
Yeah.
you end up with this like just splitting out of a million different tools.
Absolutely. But again, part of the maturity process is having control and
Mm,
consolidation. It doesn't work.
yeah.
It's at a certain stage of your business, but the larger you get, the more headcount, the bigger your projects are, the more important your clients are, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, everyone's clients are important, but I mean, the more valuable your clients are and the bigger scope of projects, the more
Mm,
that kind of spreadsheet kind of process and those disconnected things, resourcing in one place, quoting somewhere else, timesheeting somewhere else, it just becomes a liability, is the
yeah.
point. Yeah. All right. So those were the headlines. Uh, but let's talk about kind of next steps before we see if there's any questions. Um, But there's three things basically I would say that you could do to level up. If some of this stuff has resonated with you, you've seen the maturity stages, you've heard me talk about it, and you're like, oh, that kind of resonates, and all that kind of stuff. Here's some things that can help. First, if you've never heard of the maturity quiz, you can do that. Like I said earlier, it's 25 questions. They're multiple choice. It takes about 3 minutes, and you'll get your overall maturity score where you're at, the chaotic era, stable era, the innovation era, or anything in between. And you'll also get a score across each of those pillars: people, processes, technology, data, and growth strategies. Okay. So a really great way to kind of test your kind of gut instinct on where your business's maturity level is. Okay. The second thing I'd say after doing that is the webinar here. I think the three of us have covered, it looks like 7 headlines. The full report where we crunch all the data from the quiz is much longer and much more interesting. So it's really a great read. And it looks at every operational pillar, again, people, process, tech, data, and growth strategies in more detail. And talking about where the best performing agencies and consultancies are versus the bottom performing. Okay. And it also looks at differences in size of businesses. So how do the micro agencies and consultancies compare to the larger ones? And spoiler, not that different. Shockingly. And it features stories from kind of in-house leaders on what they've done to move up the maturity ladder as well. Okay. And of course, it has some more depth on the kind of things that you can be doing to level up your maturity. So again, there's a QR code on screen, but the follow-up email will also feature a link to that. So do please check it out. And the last thing, just again, a reminder that I host the handbook, the operations podcast. And off the back of this report, I'm producing, well, every episode is really about business maturity in one aspect or another. So definitely check that out. But off the back of the report, we're going to be creating additional content talking about each pillar and so on, and how you can level up if that's the area you've got gaps in. And of course, if you've enjoyed listening to me and Lindsey as well, Lindsey and I have an episode. It came out about 6 months ago, and genuinely one of our most popular episodes as well. Lindsey's great to listen to, so please do check that out if you want a place to start. That would be a great episode. And it's available on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever. And that's really it, guys. So I don't know, Richard, if there's any other questions that we want to take, but I'll stop sharing.
Yeah,
Thank you.
there's a couple. So first off, thanks, Harv. That was fantastic. Really appreciate the depth there, and thanks for the insight, Lindsey. Um, there is a question around to create a process handbook. Do you
Mhm.
bring in someone specialized to manage or coordinate it, or do you give the task to an existing staff member? Maybe Lindsey, let's throw that one to you.
That's a great question. I think it's hmm, when I've been part of it, like you'll do your first round of kind of the portions of the business that you're going to outline, and then interview the people who are responsible for that or have them write up like a one pager. I always follow also the mindset of tell me how you do it, show me how you do it, and then test me and then see how I'm doing it. You've heard that learning process, but
Mm,
getting insight, I wouldn't necessarily, you don't need somebody, you just need somebody to take the lead, right? On the
mm,
full
mm.
aspect of it. Somebody who knows all the portions of the business. It's not just the service delivery, it's the internals also. But say you might take a week and say, okay, we're going to focus on client service. Next, we're going to
Yep.
focus on, how we're billing and our processes. Next, we're going to focus on whatever else, the financial aspect of things. Whatever it may be, you can chunk it down into doing it in easier bite-sized pieces, I'd say. But if nobody has the
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
for that, or nobody maybe feels like they're as equipped to do it, then you could bring somebody in. But I think at this stage, you can use AI at different ports too to help you build the structure, and
Yeah.
then ask people to fill in the gaps, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah. Absolutely. Harv, would you add to that?
I would just say using a platform like Notion or Coda is very similar. Really simple platforms that let you start just documenting. So to Lindsay's point, just start getting stuff down. Like that's what I started to do with my handbook, was just say, okay, I'm going to start a chapter or a page on this kind of topic. And it just like starts filling up. And there's really great tools you can use. Like I think there's one called Scribe, where you just go do that action in the system, and it just takes really nice screenshots along the way and creates that documentation for you. You can use something like Loom, which is my favorite way to do something, is where you can just turn on your screen recorder while you're doing it, has a little video of you in the corner where you're able to speak and explain what you're doing, and just embed that in your Notion or Coda page. And then people can watch and follow along. So yeah, that's, I'd say just get started. And sometimes just getting team leads to start working on their processes. So you're
Mm,
not having to do everything in the business.
Yeah.
yeah. Another great question. How many employees are in a mature agency?
That's a good question. And I would say that is not really the way I would look at maturity. Like you could have a one-person agency and be at the innovation era if you're really doing everything really well, or you could be a 200-person agency, and I've seen them, which are super chaotic and well behind where they should be. So it's not about headcount. That's not maturity. Maturity is about way you operate. So do the maturity quiz, and you'll if you are in 100% agency, and you'll kind of understand where you're at.
Yeah. I would also say as sort of a semi ADHD sort of person, it's like how much ADHD is there in the leadership is more of an indicator than the number of people in the business. But anyway, that's a whole nother thing. Um, to start implementing defined roles, I would need to hire 2 other people, but I can't afford it right now. I'm not sure how to move forward. It's a
Mm,
really good question. Lindsay, you
I'll
want to take
take
that one?
that. I would say consider like fractional support. Honestly, yes, I would consider freelance support, but I would still define the roles or the functions that you need somebody to take on because
Mm,
that's still a necessary task, right? It's still part of the process that they're going to need to deliver on. So that's going to be defined. So do that first, define that first of what needs to be done, and then you can hire somebody for that or multiple people or consider AI employees these days are being considered, and I'm considering that as well for different aspects of the business. So once you define like the what has to be done, then you can really, find a person or a process that can help drive that.
mhm.
yeah. And don't try and
And then
boil
you
the
can bring it on
ocean.
as you grow. Then you bring on somebody you can afford. What's that?
Exactly. I was just going to say, and like you were saying before, don't boil the ocean. Like, just pick the biggest thing, and don't take Friday afternoon to think about it. Like, like whenever you do your best thinking, and like break that out, and just say, look, I've got this morning. I'm turning off all the emails, and I'm going to sit
Yeah,
down with Claude or ChatGPT and
yeah,
work out like a little plan just to solve this one thing. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And just try and do one thing a month even. Eventually you'll get there. But yeah, it's tricky. Were you going to say
that
something,
is.
huh?
I was just going to say that's the best advice. And block out your calendar to work on your important things, and turn on do not disturb on your
Mm.
phone, on your work
Close your
computer.
Slack, close everything.
Like, close your Slack, close your emails, because every time one of those notifications pop up, you get distracted for something like 20 minutes,
Mm.
and you never get anything done. So it's just such a great thing you said, Richard.
Get them every now and then. But anyway, I think I'm conscious of time. We're hitting the hour, so we might stop it there. Um, thanks, Harv. Thanks, Lindsay, so much for joining us. I think there's been a lot of good stuff coming out of that. Getting some thank yous in the chat as well. Really appreciate you taking the time, and thanks everyone for joining us. We'll be sending out an email with a link to a recording for this and links to what Harv's shared. But yeah, thank you so much, and all the best. Have a great day.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everyone. Thank you for
Everyone,
having me.
take care.